The Hollywood Hills dojo was packed that Saturday afternoon. Word had spread through the martial arts community like wildfire. Steven Seagal was holding court again, and when Seagal held court, you could expect a show. Camera phones were already out, social media was buzzing, and the energy in that room crackled with anticipation. Seagal stood center stage, dressed in his signature black, holding forth about authenticity, about real martial arts versus what he called Hollywood Kung Fu. His voice boomed with that familiar confidence, that unshakable certainty he'd carried for decades. And then someone made the mistake of mentioning Chucknorris. The room went quiet. Seagal's expression shifted, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. What he said next would light a fuse that burned straight to the heart of martial arts tradition, respect, and the dangerous assumption that age equals weakness. Chucknorris? Seagal laughed, loud enough for everyone to hear. The man's 70-something years old. He's done, past his prime. These young guys today, they don't need to learn from dinosaurs. They need real warriors. The phones kept recording. The damage was already done. And somewhere across town, in a quiet gym where legends train in silence, Chucknorris heard about it within the hour. Chuck was in the middle of a training session when his phone started buzzing. Not the fancy smartphone his kids had gotten him, but the simple flip phone he still preferred. He let it ring. At 73 years old, Chucknorris had learned that very few things in life were urgent enough to interrupt a good workout. The heavy bag swayed gently in front of him, worn leather wrapped in duct tape at the seams. This bag had been with him for 20 years, and he preferred it to any of the new ones. It had character. It had memory. Every impact held the echo of 10,000 strikes before it. His gym wasn't much to look at. Tucked away in a strip mall between a laundromat and a tax preparation office, it didn't advertise. No neon signs, no Instagram-worthy murals on the walls. Just a simple door with frosted glass and the words Norris Training Center stenciled in faded black letters. Inside, the floor was scuffed hardwood. The walls were bare except for a few old tournament photos, and equipment was functional rather than flashy. This was a place where people came to work, not oppose. Chuck finished his combination, jab, cross, hook, uppercut, and stepped back, breathing steady despite the exertion. His shirt was soaked through, clinging to a frame that, even at his age, remained solid. Not the massive bulk of his action star days, but lean, conditioned, dangerous in the way a coiled spring is dangerous. He rolled his shoulders, felt a familiar tightness in his left one where he'd torn his rotator cuff back in '87, and smiled. Pain was just information. His body was still talking to him, still teaching him lessons. His student Marcus, a 32-year-old firefighter who'd been training with Chuck for 5 years, was catching his breath in the corner. "You're not even winded," Marcus said, shaking his head. "I don't get it. I'm half your age and I'm dying over here." "Different kind of conditioning," Chuck said, unwrapping his hands. "You're training your body. I'm training my breath, my mind, my intention. The body follows. Always has." That's when Marcus's phone chimed. Then again. Then 3 more times in rapid succession. He glanced at the screen, his expression shifting from curiosity to something darker. Anger, maybe, or embarrassment on someone else's behalf. "What is it?" Chuck asked, though his tone suggested he wasn't particularly concerned. Marcus hesitated. "It's probably nothing. Just social media nonsense." "Show me." The young firefighter walked over. Phone extended. The video was already playing. Steven Seagal, bigger than life, surrounded by students and cameras, pontificating about martial arts purity. Chuck recognized the setup immediately. This wasn't a private training session. This was a performance. Seagal had always been good at performances. Then came the moment. Seagal's expression shifted into that smirk. That look Chuck had seen on too many faces over too many years. The look of someone who confused confidence with arrogance so thoroughly they could no longer tell the difference. Chucknorris? The man's 70-something years old. He's done, past his prime. These young guys today, they don't need to learn from dinosaurs. They need real warriors, real technique, not movie star karate. The crowd in the video laughed, some uncomfortably, some enthusiastically. Seagal was playing to them, feeding off their energy. The phone cameras kept recording, and Chuck knew that within hours, this clip would be everywhere. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. The algorithm would love it. Controversy, big names, martial arts drama. Marcus looked at Chuck, waiting for a reaction. Anger, maybe. Wounded pride. Something. Chuck handed the phone back. His expression hadn't changed. Calm, neutral, present, interesting was all he said. Interesting? Chuck, he just called you a dinosaur. He said you're washed up. This is everywhere already. People are talking about it. Some of them are agreeing with him. Chuck walked to the bench, picked up his water bottle, took a long drink. What do you want me to do, Marcus? Challenge him to a duel? Put out a response video? Get into a social media war with a man who clearly needs attention more than he needs wisdom? I mean, yeah, maybe. Don't you want to defend yourself? Against what? The truth is, I am 73 years old. That's just a fact. Seagal can't take that away from me, and I wouldn't want him to if he could. Every year I've lived, every lesson I've learned, every mistake I've made, that's not weakness. That's currency. That's wealth he doesn't have and can't buy. Marcus sat down heavily on the bench. So you're just going to let him say whatever he wants? People have been saying whatever they want about me for 50 years. Sometimes they're right. Sometimes they're wrong. Either way, it's just noise. What matters is what's true, not what's loud. But even as Chuck said it, he felt something stirring beneath the calm. Not anger exactly. Not even offense. Something older than that. Something primal. The same feeling he'd gotten in the ring decades ago when an opponent disrespected, not just him, but the art itself, the tradition, the teachers who'd come before, the students who would come after. Steven Seagal hadn't just insulted Chucknorris. He'd insulted every martial artist who'd ever gotten old, every teacher who'd ever been dismissed because of gray hair and laugh lines, every warrior who'd earned their wrinkles through decades of dedication. And that, Chuck thought, might require a response after all. The video went viral within hours. By evening, it had 3 million views. By the next morning, it was trending on every platform. The martial arts community was divided. Some defended Chuck fiercely, pointing to his competition record, his legitimate black belts, his years of dedication to the craft. Others, particularly younger practitioners who'd grown up watching Seagal's films and listening to his stories about training with this master or that secret tradition, sided with him. Age was age, they argued. Time was undefeated. Chucknorris might have been great once, but those days were gone. What made it worse were the follow-up videos. Seagal, sensing he'd struck a nerve and loving the attention, doubled down. He posted a video to his own channel, sitting in what appeared to be a traditional Japanese room, speaking with the measured authority of a sensei. I have nothing personal against Chuck, he said, voice dripping with false humility. I respect what he did in his era. But we have to be honest about where we are now. The martial arts have evolved. The techniques I practice, the systems I mastered, they're from a different level. And age, look, it's nature. We can't fight nature. The body breaks down. The reflexes slow. It's not disrespect to acknowledge reality. More views, more shares, more comments from people who'd never trained a day in their lives, but had strong opinions about who would win a fight between two septuagenarians. Chuck's phone kept buzzing. Students, friends, former training partners, all asking the same question. What are you going to do? He ignored most of the calls. But when Joe Rogan called, Chuck answered. You seeing this circus? Joe asked, his voice a mix of amusement and genuine concern. Hard to miss. What's your move? You coming on the podcast? We could set the record straight. Let you tell your side. My side of what? A man I haven't spoken to in 20 years thinks I'm old? Joe, I got news for you. I am old. That's not controversial. Joe laughed. Yeah, but you know what he's really saying. He's saying you're weak, that you're irrelevant, that you couldn't hang with him if it came down to it. And what do you think? I think Steven Seagal has been living in his own fantasy world for so long he's forgotten what reality looks like. I think he's never had anyone actually test him. Not really. And he's mistaken the absence of challenge for the presence of supremacy. And I think if you two actually stood in a ring together, it wouldn't be close. Chuck was quiet for a moment. You know what the difference is between Steven and me? What's that? I've lost. I've been beaten. I've been knocked down, submitted, outclassed. I know exactly what my limits are because I've hit them repeatedly. And every time I did, I learned something. Steven's never let himself lose. He's never put himself in a position where he could be exposed. So he doesn't know where his limits are. And a man who doesn't know his own limits is dangerous, mostly to himself. So you're not going to respond? I didn't say that. 3 days later, a letter arrived at Steven Seagal's office. Not an email, not a DM, not a public call-out. An actual letter, handwritten, on simple paper. Steven, I heard what you said about me. About age and dinosaurs and real warriors. You're entitled to your opinion. But if you truly believe what you're saying, if you really think that time has made me irrelevant, then I'd like to invite you to test that theory. Not in front of cameras. Not for social media. Just you and me in a private setting with witnesses who understand what they're watching. A friendly match between two old martial artists. No egos, no posturing. Just technique, timing, and truth. If you're right about me being past my prime, this is your chance to prove it. If you're wrong, well, that's a lesson worth learning too. The address is below. Any Saturday afternoon. Just show up. Respectfully, Chucknorris. The letter found its way to Seagal through his management. They advised against responding. This was a trap, they said, a publicity stunt. Chuck was trying to bait him into something that could only make him look bad. If he won, people would say he beat up an old man. If he lost, his credibility would be destroyed. But Seagal, for all his bluster, wasn't stupid. He was calculating, and he saw an opportunity. If he ignored the letter, people would say he was scared, that he talked big but couldn't back it up. But if he accepted, and if he was careful about how he framed it, he could control the narrative. He could show up, make it look good, and walk away with his reputation enhanced. The problem was, he actually believed his own hype. Years of surrounding himself with students who never challenged him, of telling stories that grew taller with each retelling, of building a mythology around his own abilities. It had insulated him from reality. He genuinely thought he was the superior martial artist, that his Aikido was unbeatable, that his years of special training, with masters whose names he could never quite verify, had given him techniques that men like Chucknorris, with their sport karate backgrounds, could never understand. So he accepted, privately, through a mutual acquaintance. No cameras, no press, just a date and time. The Saturday came quietly. Chuck's gym, usually bustling on weekends, had been cleared except for a handful of witnesses. Joe Rogan was there, along with 2 legitimate martial arts masters, one a 10-degree black belt in judo, the other a former world champion kickboxer. They would serve as referees and judges. The rules were simple. 3 5-minute rounds, continuous sparring, no strikes of groin or throat, tap or verbal submission ends a match, referee stops on injury or one-sided domination. Chuck arrived early, as he always did. He stretched methodically, working through the same routine he'd followed for 40 years. His body felt good. Not young. He'd never feel young again, but ready, alive, present. Steven Seagal arrived 20 minutes late, stepping through the door like a celebrity entering a premiere. He was dressed in traditional martial arts attire, all black, with his hair pulled back. His entourage had been left outside at Chuck's insistence. This was going to be private, no matter how much Seagal wanted it to be a show. "Chuck," Seagal said, extending his hand. His grip was firm, performative. "I appreciate you setting this up. I think it's important, for the martial arts community to see that we can resolve disagreements with respect and honor." Chuck shook his hand. "It's good to see you, Stephen. It's been a long time." "Indeed it has. You're looking well. In good shape for your age." There was again, for your age, the qualifier, the subtle dig wrapped in a compliment. "Let's get started," Chuck said simply. They moved to the center of the mat. The rules were reviewed. Both men confirmed they understood. The referee, the judo master, positioned himself to the side. "Keep it clean. Keep it controlled. Respect each other." "Ready?" Both men nodded. "Bow." They bowed to each other. A formality, a ritual, a promise. "Fight." Seagal moved first. A sweeping Aikido technique meant control Chuck's wrist and take him down with a flowing joint lock. It was textbook Seagal. Circular, dramatic, impressive looking if it worked. It didn't work. Chuck's hand wasn't where Seagal expected it to be. Years of point fighting, of lightning-fast exchanges where a fraction of a second determined victory or defeat, had given Chuck reflexes that didn't need youth to function. His hand pulled back, changed angle, and suddenly Seagal was reaching into empty space. Chuck didn't capitalize on it yet. He circled, light on his feet, watching, studying. This was information gathering. Seagal tried again, this time a different approach. He closed distance, reached for Chuck's collar, attempted another flowing technique. Again, Chuck wasn't there. He slipped the angle, pivoted on his back foot, and was 3 feet away before Seagal's technique could even begin. The room was silent, except for the sound of feet on the mat and controlled breathing. Joe Rogan watched with the intensity of someone who understood exactly what he was seeing. This wasn't going how Seagal had expected. Seagal, starting to realize his techniques weren't landing, shifted his approach. He tried to close distance, to get Chuck into a clinch where Aikido's close-range techniques might be more effective. But Chuck's footwork was pristine. Every time Seagal advanced, Chuck was at a perfect angle. Not running away, not retreating, just positioning himself where he couldn't be controlled. 2 minutes into the first round, Seagal was breathing harder than he should have been. Frustration was creeping into his movements. His techniques, which worked perfectly on compliant students in his own dojo, were useless against someone who simply refused to give him the attack patterns he needed. Chuck saw the opening, not in Seagal's technique, but in his mind. The frustration, the confusion, the slow dawning realization that this wasn't going to be easy. Chuck stepped forward for the first time, not dramatically, not with showmanship. He just closed distance and threw a simple jab, straight down the middle, fast as a whip. It caught Seagal on the cheek. Not hard. Chuck had pulled it significantly, but clean, undeniable. Seagal's eyes widened. He tried to counter with a circular block and wrist grab, but Chuck's hand was already gone. Another jab, this one to the forehead, then a low kick, snapping into Seagal's thigh. Not full power, not trying to injure, just establishing that he could hit anything he wanted, anytime he wanted. Seagal stumbled back. Hold on. The referee didn't stop the match. Seagal hadn't called for a stop, hadn't tapped, hadn't signaled injury. He just complained. Chuck paused anyway, ever the gentleman. "You okay?" "Those are karate techniques. We agreed Aikido." "Stephen," the kickboxing referee interrupted. There was no agreement about specific techniques. The rules were 3 rounds of continuous sparring. That's it. Seagal's face flushed. He'd expected this to be a demonstration of Aikido principles, a chance to show his art's superiority. Instead, it was a real match. And real matches didn't care about what style looked coolest in movies. "Continue," the referee said. They touched gloves again. This time, Seagal came forward with aggression, trying to overwhelm Chuck with forward pressure. It was clumsy, desperate. Chuck moved like water around rocks, never where Seagal expected, always at the perfect distance to land strikes without receiving them. A straight right caught Seagal on the jaw, a hook to the ribs, a perfectly timed roundhouse that slapped against Seagal's thigh with an audible smack. Each strike was controlled and measured, but the message was clear. Chuck could do whatever he wanted. The first round ended with Seagal bent over, hands on his knees, sucking air. Chuck was barely breathing hard. He walked back to his corner, took a sip of water, and glanced at Joe, who was trying very hard not to smile. Round 2 was worse for Seagal. His techniques, which looked so impressive in his own video surrounded by cooperative students, were completely ineffective against someone who'd spent decades training against live, resisting opponents. Every time he reached for a wrist, it wasn't there. Every time he tried to initiate a throw, Chuck's base was too good, his balance too perfect. And Chuck, operating from muscle memory built over 50 years of high-level competition, was landing strikes at will. Nothing vicious, nothing meant to seriously hurt, but enough to prove a point that was becoming impossible to ignore. 3 minutes into round 2, Seagal made a desperate lunge, trying to get double underhooks and use his size advantage. Chuck sprawled, a wrestling defense so perfectly timed that Seagal found himself face down on the mat with Chuck, controlling his back. "Tap or continue?" the referee asked. Seagal's face was pressed against the canvas. He could feel Chuck's weight on him, could feel how easily the older man was controlling his posture. Every time he tried to turn, Chuck adjusted, staying in the dominant position with what felt like minimal effort. "Tap," Seagal finally muttered. "Louder, please," the referee said. "I tap." Chuck released immediately, stood up, offered his hand to help Seagal up. Seagal ignored it, rolling to his side and getting up on his own. "Good match," Chuck said quietly. Seagal didn't respond. He walked to the corner, breathing hard, his face a mask of humiliation and anger. His worldview, carefully constructed over decades of yes-men in controlled environments, had just shattered in 11 minutes of actual resistance. The third round never happened. Seagal claimed to pull muscle in his back, said he couldn't continue. The referee checked him out. There was no visible injury, no obvious problem, but you couldn't force someone to fight if they said they couldn't. Match and by retirement, the referee announced. Winner by technical submission and retirement, Chucknorris. The small group of witnesses stood in silence. This wasn't something to celebrate. There was no joy in watching someone's inflated ego deflate in real time. It was just sad. A man who'd spent so long believing his own mythology had been forced to confront reality, and reality had been unkind. Seagal gathered his things quickly. "Good work, Chuck," he said, the words forced. "You still got some skills. For your age." Chuck nodded. "Take care of that back, Stephen. Recovery gets harder as you get older. Trust me." Seagal left without another word. Joe Rogan approached Chuck, shaking his head in amazement. I expected you to do well, but that was complete domination." "It wasn't about domination," Chuck said, starting to unwrap his hands. "It was about truth. Stephen needed to understand that volume isn't the same as substance, that talking about being a warrior and actually being one are two different things." "You think he learned anything?" Chuck looked toward the door Seagal had just exited through. "I don't know. Some people learn from losing. Some people just get better at making excuses. That's up to him." The witnesses filed out, sworn to keep what they'd seen private. This wasn't going to be a viral video moment. It wasn't going to be content for the algorithm. It was just going to be a story whispered to the martial arts community, a lesson passed along in gyms and dojos. But lessons have a way of spreading. Within weeks, without any video footage, without any public statements, the story had reached every corner of the martial arts world. The details were surprisingly consistent. How Seagal's techniques hadn't worked, how Chuck had made it look easy, how the whole thing had ended with a tap and a retirement. And slowly, quietly, Steven Seagal's presence on social media began to change. The bold proclamations became less frequent. The challenges to other martial artists stopped. He still posted, still made his movies, still told his stories. But there was something missing from it now. A certain confidence that had been punctured and couldn't quite be reinflated. Chuck never mentioned the match publicly. When asked in interviews about Seagal's original comments, he simply said, "Steven and I had a private conversation. I think we understand each other better now." He didn't gloat. He didn't need to. The truth was out there, and truth didn't need marketing. Months later, a young fighter approached Chuck at a seminar. The kid was 22, ambitious, talented, with that familiar edge of arrogance that comes with early success. During the Q&A session, he raised his hand. "Chuck, no disrespect, but don't you think at your age you should step aside and let the new generation take over? I mean, the sport has evolved. We're faster, stronger, better trained than your generation ever was." The room went quiet. Some of the older practitioners looked uncomfortable. They'd heard this tune before. Chuck smiled. "You might be right. You probably are faster than me. Maybe stronger. Definitely better trained in some ways. You got advantages we never had. Technology, nutrition science, training methods. That's all real." The young fighter nodded, satisfied. "But," Chuck continued, "fast and strong and well-trained, those are just tools. What matters is whether you know when to use them, whether you have the wisdom to know which battles are worth fighting, whether you've learned the difference between proving you're good and actually being good." He paused, looking around the room at faces both young and old. "Age does take things from you. That's not debatable. Your speed goes. Your recovery time gets longer. Your body starts keeping score of every hard session, every injury you thought you could train through. But it gives you something too. Perspective, patience, the ability to see 3 moves ahead because you've lived through 1,000 different scenarios." Chuck leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping but somehow carrying to every corner of the room. "There's a difference between a warrior and someone who just knows how to fight. A warrior understands that real strength isn't about dominating everyone around you. It's about knowing you could and choosing not to. It's about being dangerous and choosing to be kind. It's about having nothing to prove because you've already done the work of proving things to yourself." The young fighter was quiet now, really listening for the first time. "So no," Chuck said, "I don't think I need to step aside. Not because I want to hold on to glory or relevance or whatever, but because maybe, just maybe, some of you need to see that the work doesn't stop, that the journey doesn't end when you hit your athletic peak, that there's a whole other level of mastery that only comes with time and humility and being willing to keep learning even when you think you know everything." The room erupted in applause. Not the polite golf clap of a martial arts seminar, but genuine, thunderous appreciation. The young fighter, to his credit, nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful rather than defensive. After the seminar, as Chuck was packing up his gear, the old judo master who'd refereed the match with Seagal approached him. "That was good," the master said in his thick Japanese accent. "What you said about being dangerous and choosing kindness, that is the heart of Budo. Someone taught me that once," Chuck said, "a long time ago." "Your teacher?" "My losses. Every time I got beaten, every time someone exposed a weakness, I had a choice. Get bitter or get better. Build my ego up higher to protect myself, or break it down and build something real underneath." The master nodded. Seagal-san never had those losses. Or he did, but he couldn't accept them. So he built walls instead of foundations. And walls always fall eventually. "They do," Chuck agreed. "But sometimes that's the lesson they needed to learn. Sometimes falling is the first step to actually standing on solid ground." Years would pass. Steven Seagal would continue his career, his movies, his social media presence. But he never again made public comments about Chucknorris or anyone else's age. When asked about it in interviews, he'd change the subject or offer vague statements about respect for all martial artists. Those who knew the full story understood what that diplomatic silence really meant. Chucknorris continued teaching. His gym never got bigger or fancier. He never sought the spotlight or the validation. Students came because other students told them to come, because there was something real being taught in that unassuming space between the laundromat and the tax office. They came young and cocky and left humbled and better. They came old and broken and left stronger than they'd been in decades. And sometimes, late at night when the gym was empty and Chuck was alone with his thoughts and his heavy bag, he'd think about that afternoon, about Seagal's face when the techniques didn't work, about the moment the other man realized that volume and confidence and social media presence couldn't replace actual skill, about how sad it was that someone could spend a lifetime in martial arts and never really understand what martial arts were supposed to teach you. He thought about the letter he could have sent afterward, something gracious, something that extended a hand and offered mentorship, but he knew it wouldn't have been received. Some lessons you had to learn on your own. Some humility you had to earn through lived experience, not through someone else's charity. What Chuck hoped, more than anything, was that somewhere in all of it, Steven Seagal had found a moment of clarity, a moment where he looked in the mirror and saw not the image he'd been projecting, but the reality underneath, and that in that moment, instead of building the walls higher, he'd had the courage to start over, to admit he didn't know everything, to be a student again. Whether that happened or not, Chuck would never know, and that was okay. Some stories don't have neat endings. Some lessons take decades to fully absorb. The only thing he could control was his own path, his own choices, his own commitment to being both dangerous and kind. The heavy bag swayed in the empty gym. Chuck's hands were wrapped. His stance was ready. His breath was calm. At 73 years old, he was exactly where he was supposed to be, not past his prime, not a dinosaur, just a man who'd done the work, learned the lessons, and understood that real strength was never about proving anything to anyone. It was about knowing who you were when no one was watching, when there were no cameras, no audiences, no viral videos to validate your existence, just you and the work and the truth. And the truth was simple. Age would eventually take everything. Speed, strength, even the ability to throw a proper punch. But wisdom, character, the quiet confidence that came from a lifetime of facing challenges with honesty and humility, those things didn't fade with time. They deepened. They became the foundation that held you up when your body started breaking down. Chuck threw a combination: jab, cross, hook, clean, precise, powerful, not bad for a dinosaur. In the end, that's what made Steven Seagal's comments so ironic. He tried to diminish Chuck by pointing to his age as if years were a weakness. But those years were Chuck's greatest strength. Every one of them represented a choice to keep learning, to stay humble, to let the work speak louder than the words. You can't buy that kind of strength. You can't fake it with movie roles or social media posts or stories about secret training with mysterious masters. You earn it through decades of showing up, taking your lumps, learning from your losses, and choosing character over ego every single time. That's the lesson Steven Seagal learned that day on the mat. That's the lesson Chucknorris had been teaching for 50 years. And that's the lesson that matters most, whether you're 22 and undefeated or 73 and still throwing punches in an empty gym at midnight. Real warriors don't need to announce themselves. They don't need to call anyone a dinosaur or claim superiority. They just do the work, honor the art, and let the results speak for themselves. And when the talking is done and the cameras are off and it's just two people on a mat testing truth against illusion, the work always wins. Always. Because the loudest voice in the room is rarely the strongest. The most confident claim is rarely the truest. And the person with the most to prove is usually the one with the least to show. Chucknorris knew that. He'd always known that. It's why he never needed to respond to Seagal's original comments with words. He just needed to be himself. 73 years old, dinosaur status confirmed, and still absolutely undeniable when it mattered most. That's not age. That's mastery. And mastery doesn't fade. It just gets quieter, deeper, and more dangerous in ways that people who measure strength by volume will never understand until they meet it face to face. And by then, the lesson is already learned.